in the movie industry, hybrids are a great thing. Think about it. A hybrid can be many things. Spy comedy, humor and horror, maybe a drama and a thriller. These are comedies that can work well. But there's always one hybrid that I love. And that's when live action and animation meet. The personalities of live action animation are already great and already beloved for what they are. However, there are a lot of prominent examples out there. Mary Poppins, Space Jam, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, and several others that are well known and not well known to the general public. But there is one that everyone knows. And one where it just makes you want to smile, Donya smile, whenever it's on screen. One that is well known between the masses, and that is Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And on this episode of the Good Film Podcast presents Down the Animated Rabbit Hole, we look into the history of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So, instead of going to box office bombs for our movies this time, we're going to go with one that made a little bit of a profit. Greens are ready. I'm going Thomas 45 or Thomas Memorial 45. Which is the Good Film Podcast, and today it'll be the history of Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Goodbye, Dinah. Goodbye.
Things are gonna get crazy.
Most everyone's mad here.
Before we get to Who Framed Roger Rabbit, we have, well, Who Censored Roger Rabbit? Yeah, the movie's actually an adaptation of the book Who Censored Roger Rabbit. Now, what I'm going to do is something a bit different. I'm going to compare and contrast the book and see what's different about the movie and go in depth. By the way, this might take some time, so please sit back. The book and the movie are very different. But before we get to that, let's get into the origins of this novel right here. Gary K. Wolfe wrote this, is the author of this book. He wrote it through his love of three things. Cartoons, comic characters, and pulp adventure novels. He wrote after seeing cereal mascots in commercials. Okay? The book became a bit of a really small hit. Of course, the book and the movie are very different. Okay? Let's begin with some obvious differences. I'll give you a discussion of characters right now. Now, in the movie, Roger's kind of a mix of different cartoon characters. We'll get to that a bit later. But instead, in the book, he is always in brown fur all around, and he's about 6 feet tall. He also enjoys anime liquor named Toon Shine, which, by the way, I highly doubt his actual version can handle, considering how he handles a regular liquor. So yeah. His main character in this book is Eddie Valiant, who has basically no backstory. The whole dead brother thing is not there. And he's a typical grumpy detective. He doesn't really need a dead brother to drink copious amounts of booze. Okay? Jessica Rabbit is a swinging gold digger kind of character who in the book actually divorces Roger for Walker DeGreasy, her old husband. Okay? Roger. Okay? Now let's go into the main story of this book. And by the way, spoiler alert, but you kind of figure that out when this is a detective novel. So let's begin. The main story starts with Roger Rabbit taking a bit of wanted to solve a case of a work dispute, basically, between Wako and Dominic DeGreasy. Oh, and by the way, one thing to note is that every time a tune talks, a speech bubble appears. So, yeah, so when Tom talks, they would say student tutorial, like, okay? But anyways, I'm getting off track, okay? A Retroton is planned when Roger dies. That's right, he dies. Well, you might be asking, how do you, okay, well, we'll get to that bit. Later on, though, he appears in Amy's apartment. Now, I'll just say he was dead, right? Technically, yes. I am not wrong about the dead part. However, this is a doppel. Tunes can create a doppel variant called, well, a copy called doppels. These kind of doppels are basically an identical but basically just a mindless, lipless manifestation. Okay. These are meant to perform dangerous stunts that the regular tune wouldn't survive. Kind of like a stunt doppel. Okay? However, doppels don't last long, so time is of the essence for this case. Then I'm going to go into spoilers right here. Okay? Roger actually murdered Dominic DeGreasy and actually wanted to pin it on Eddie. Not only that, but Roger is actually in possession of a tea kettle. Remember, Roger's doppel is the alibi. That was his alibi of getting it. So he would be the one that did it. Afterwards, Roger Roger's also in possession of a tea kettle. Tea kettle was actually how Roger married Jessica early on. Okay? Roger's however, he didn't know that there's a magic kettle with a genie in it. It has a genie in it. Roger initially decides to wish for random things, including get married Jessica Rabbit, and also to have his own cartoon strip. However, it kind of had a monkey's paw kind of style where everything when it would go right also had a curse to it. For example, when he really became a cartoon character, it also meant he was a talentless hack and didn't get the lead roles that he'd been designing. And when Jessica Rabbit, once the show went off, she divorced him. And now Jessica Rabbit also is looking to murder Roger for murdering Wako DeGreasy. Now this genie is actually an evil genie and is the one who murdered Roger Rabbit. In the end, the genie is mainly defeated, and Roger, despite feeling no remorse, is exonerated of the crime. However, in the end, and he calls Eddie a stout guy in the end. However, just as he's willing to reach out his hand and shake his hand, Roger moves away in the distance with his double-plated desk, where Eddie stands out the window and the air have his ashes. So yeah, the book is kind of bonkers. Both Roger and Jessica come out as gigantic assholes in the whole novel, and at least has a bit of a different ways of both characters. But it's actually a pretty good read. Actually, I'm going to recommend the book if you can find it anywhere. I actually recommend it. It's actually a pretty good read, all things considered. It doesn't have much to do with the movie, but it's still a good read, and it was a key help. But before we get on with it, I'd actually like to thank the video of what's the difference between on Netflix they did on this book. I will recommend it, and I put a link to it in the description below. Alright, let's get back into the podcast. Alright everybody, the comparison between the movie and the book are now done. Now let's get to the movie itself. So, I'm trying to get picture. It was back in 1981. Well, those purchased film rights to the novel, shortly after its publication. Ron Miller, then president of Disney, saw a perfect opportunity to turn a blockbuster and hired Jeffrey Price and Peter Seaman to write the script, pay the first 2 drafts. Okay, let's go over that. But okay, for the inspiration, they decided to work on the classical tunes of Disney, and Warner Brothers, and the Golden Generation, and wanted the humor of Tex Avery to get in the picture. Now, what's the Tex Avery style gag? What is relevant to this video? A Tex Avery style gag refers to animated Tex Avery. You see, back in the 1930s, the Looney Tunes were basically basic ripoffs of Disney products. They even had kept the Boxy Fox before Disney sued them for the ones to Mickey Mouse. This was until Tex Avery was brought in and changed things up with his first cartoon, Gold Diggers of 49, as a prime example. He would later create characters characters like Daffy Duck.
Don't let it worry you, Skipper. I'm just a crazy, darn fool duck.
And Bugs Bunny as point examples of his work.
What's up, Doc?
However, in 1941, he would leave Warner Brothers after a dispute with his cartoon, the Heckling Ham, and moving on to MGM, where his style was developed even further with cartoons like Red Hot Riding Hood, Bad Luck Blackie, and his works with Droopy Dog. However, his influence at Warner Brothers wouldn't be left there, as they would all work together, as his influence would come back with animators like Chuck Jones, Bob Clampett, for his Freeling, and Robert McKimson would all leave in his wake and make tunes that are different. His influence also extended to other studios too, like MGM and Walter Lantz Studios. So it wasn't exactly all bad, and he was able to come back with the main script though. What was he meant to look like? Well, going from the early draft of script. Well, let's begin with how the fact that this was initially not really working out well. How so? Well, 1982, Robert Zemeckis asked if he offered his services to Disney. However, Disney declined the offer. Mainly it's because he was known for directing box office bombs, like movies I Want to Hold Your Hand and Used Cars. Both were critically acclaimed. However, both bombed at the box office. So in a sense, the film itself didn't do many numbers, and instead Disney decided not to work with him on these films. The writing process during this time, Disney was also trying to figure out who would be the main villain of the strap. Also got an early draft versions down. Okay. This early draft version of the version had Paul Reubens as Roger Rabbit.
Another thing, you tone down that goofiness. If you want my help, you act like a human. You understand?
Oh, yes, sir. But wouldn't it be more helpful if I started to come along with you? Because what if maybe you gotta get into some more locks or something? Okay.
Alright. Peter Beneday as Eddie Valiant and Rusty Taylor as Jessica Rabbit. Tyler.
You have beautiful features, so strong and well defined.
Chipped out of granite, that's me.
You will take my case, won't you?
Not a chance.
What do you mean, not a chance?
The animation director of this whole test footage was Dale Van Siders, who would Dale Van Siders would work with Disney on all the hype, on the main production of this whole major production of the whole thing, of the film. However, and the writers both disagreed on a lot of elements. For one, Dale Van Siders wanted Roger Rabbit to be more of a sad clown character, rather than what the other two were doing, where Roger Rabbit was more of a humorous suit. He also was very opposed to the whole Tex Avery style gag idea, saying he wanted to be more serious and stuff. In a sense, they became very hard to work with in a sense, and he eventually was moved off the project and was put on to another project, Sport Goofy and Soccer Mania. Okay, Ron Miller, without a major director, they had to look elsewhere in the studio to help on the main film. The production of Roger Rabbit also was now shut down. What do I mean by that? Well, many factors in front of it. For one, Ron Miller began to lose interest in this film. Okay, after working establishing Touchstone Pictures and more, the film he began to lose interest and decided not to change up production instead. Another change up in production was the fact that the budget originally was set to be $30 million. However, the budget quickly would be ballooning if they would ever get any cartoon characters. By the time of Woody Woodpecker, nobody was ever getting involved with this early version. Peter Seaman and Jeffrey Price were also having a hard time managing their own script, making it harder and harder to get the work done in a sense. So in 1985, the project was shelved for the time being. But however, that project will later get reopened in 1984, Disney was getting revamped. Ron Miller was let go of the CEO after, and instead new CEOs were being found too. That being Paramount Pictures' main CEO from 1976-1984, Michael Eisner. Eisner decided to make the film look out testing to see how it would go over the heads of Disney. The budget was now decreased was back to 30. However, with the amount of rights then loomed, instead, the film itself was now ballooned to be roughly now, instead of dollars, was now changed to $50 million. So I've been waiting for this project. Michael Eisner almost started scrapping the entire film because of this. However, when he hired Jeff Katzenberg to be the animation fund, Katzenberg actually suggested something else. Instead of this, they asked if they could hire Steven Spielberg to help out with this film. Spielberg, on his part, Spielberg was helping make the film on his part. Spielberg was agreed to the film afterwards, and the project was saved. As for director, Terry Gilliam was offered the chance of directing. However, he did find the project too technically challenging. He later said this, pure laziness on my part. He later added, and quote unquote, I completely regret the decision of not directing. Instead, they brought back Robert Zemeckis, who at the time was now making successful film after successful film, with Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future. Romancing the Stone was one of the highest grossing films in 1984, starring Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner as the main cast roles, and was a throwback to the 1950s and 40s adventure serials. Back to the Future was even more success, becoming the highest grossing film in 1985, and okay, this is off topic, but still a personal favorite of my personal favorite film, right? Okay, right. So yeah. Now that this was in high demand, he was brought back to be the main director of the whole thing. With that production being added more and more, they added more. It's time to stop making a movie with its main contributors. Price and Seaman were hired back to do the films. They were unsure about the villain. Initial drafts had just Rabbit and Baby Herman as villain, but also decided to create a new villain with Judge Doom. Judge Doom was originally going to have a vulture sit on his side named Voltaire. He also going to have a kangaroo court. And I mean that quite literally. He had a cartoon section of kangaroos with joeys that would all spell, "You are guilty." However, this was bumped up for technical reasons. As for his main sidekicks, they were now might be the Weasels. The Weasels would be an inverse of the Seven Dwarfs: dark, grumpy, happy, sleepy, bashful, sneezy, and dopey. However, there's only 5 Weasels. Weasels like Slimy, Flashy, and Sleazy were cut out of the script, for example. Instead, the main 5 Weasels are Stupid, Greasy, Wheezy, Psycho, and Smartass. Now, I just want to remark that in later media, Smartass is usually called Smart Guy or Wise Guy in the final film. Doom was also added to be the who killed Bambi's mother. Now, this was later changed. Now, this is no longer in the film. So, another thing was that Doom was always meant to be a tune, and there are also hints. For one thing, there's always a gust of wind as an idea. He also never blinks in the final film. So I'll get into the reason why later on, but still. And, the film after the Judge Doom and the 2 Weasels were bad, and the film, okay, what about the rest of the filming? What about something like the animation or all that? Well, for that, they hired characters. Yes, okay? The main part afterwards was they would also make, however, as for the main solution, the whole elements were added in. The Ink and Paint Club was a resemblance to Harlem's Con Club. Well, Zemeckis compared Judge Doom's whole dip to eliminate all tunes to Hitler's final solution. The whole, at least the animated scenes between the scenes, which were meant to be of the dueling pianos, which was meant to be done by Chuck Jones. However, in the end, Jones did not do that part, and it said all that great work was wasted in the end. So, instead, Joe Raft and Mark Kosler did the role instead, the whole sequence being added in post. But that's all just the writing and the acting, the production. What comes next? Well, stay tuned as we look into the other side of the production after the break.
From Touchstone Pictures, a hot new star, a two-bit detective. Every moment they're together is a new adventure in trouble, compassion,
I'm sorry I yanked your ears.
All the time you yanked my ear?
and gratitude.
How can I ever repay you?
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? A Steven Spielberg presentation, a Robert Zemeckis film.
Don't ever kiss me again.
Rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you. Check newspaper for showtimes.
Welcome back. So now that the production and the writing are now back on track, it's time to look into other medias too. Let's get into the casting of this movie. Okay, let's begin with Eddie Valiant's casting. They actually had to look through several actors to get through the role of Eddie Valiant. Harrison Ford was the first one selected to play as the role of Eddie Valiant. However, he was too expensive. Chevy Chase was second, but Chevy Chase turned him down. He was not interested. Eddie Murphy was also asked too, but he also said the film would be a nothing but disaster. Although he later said he did regret this decision. Bill Murray was also considered for the role. However, he was unfortunately unavailable at the time. Other actors were tried out too, with actors like Robin Williams, Jack Nicholson, Charles Grodin, Ed Harris, and more were also considered too. In the end, they actually asked British actor Bob Hoskins, who was fairly unknown in the department of the era, but instead played Eddie Valiant.
You keep talking like that, and I'm gonna have to wash your mouth out.
As for the main villain, Judge Doom, Christopher Lee was asked for the role, but he turned it down. Tim Curry was asked for the role, but Tim Curry was found to be too scary as Judge Doom. John Cleese was expressed interest in the role, however he had the opposite problem, not being scary enough. Other actors including Peter O'Toole, F. Murray Abraham, and even Sting were considered for the role. In the end, Zemeckis recalled asking for his old buddy he went to Back to the Future, Christopher Lloyd, to come back in, who had previously played Doc Brown.
That's one big shoe, hey boss?
They're not kid gloves, Mr. Valiant. But this is how we handle things down in Toontown. I'd think you of all people would appreciate that.
He said that to help sell the illusion that Judge Doom was a tune as well, Lloyd avoided blinking throughout the whole shoot while on camera. As for the main actor who was meant to portray Roger Rabbit though, that was different. Paul Reubens was initially the one who tried for the screen test, but it didn't work out. Instead, an upcoming comedian named Charles Fleischer was added instead. Before filming, Fleischer asked to come up with a list for Roger Rabbit. And eventually his own standard catchphrase, please, and a sentence afterwards. For the role of Jessica Rabbit, Kathleen Turner was brought in as a favor for Jessica Rabbit, and also was asked to not get credit for the film at any time. The Zemeckis had previously worked with Turner on Romance of the Stone. So for Jessica's design. She was given the design of Rita Hayworth's as one of her main designs, and of course Veronica Lake's peekaboo style hairstyle. M was given portions that would make her impossible to stand up, and make sure that only a tomb has those proportions. Speaking of which, let's get to the animation right now. For the animation director, they had a man named Richard Williams to make the picture. Richard Williams was a Canadian-born British director who got his work directing 2 shorts, The Little Island and Love Me, Love Me, Love Me. He then later worked on his most ambitious feature, The Thief and the Cobbler. I would go into detail with The Thief and the Cobbler, but let's just say that The Thief and the Cobbler is a rather long story. And instead, he was known for being hard to work with. The reason he was hired was he was able to ability his animation, especially on some bad commercials that they had done at the same time. He was hired to do some things. He was hired to make a design of Roger Rabbit to have, he would have the design, he was given kind of a Frankenstein, Roger was going to make a Frankenstein design of each of the characters. He was given Tex Avery's nut-shaped head from his cartoons, the swath of red hair on Droopy Dog, Goofy's overalls, Porky Pig's bow tie, the yellow gloves of Mickey Mouse posters, and cheeks and ears from Bugs Bunny. And was given a color palette of red, white, and blue, like the American flag. As for security cartoon characters, that also was proven much better. Okay, now that they have Spielberg on power, Spielberg was able to entice many in the industry to ask for cartoon characters, and they were going to get a wide scope of cartoon characters. Cartoon characters from Warner Brothers, Fleischer, Harvey Comics, King Feature Syndicate, Bluesky Productions, Universal, and more were all added to mix these characters. In the case of Warner Brothers, though, Warner Brothers will only allow the big stars like Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck to appear on screen as long as they have the same amount of screen time as Disney's characters, which will lead to scenes like the dual piano scene between Donald Duck and Daffy Duck.
This time I work with someone with a speech impediment. This means war.
And of course, the classic scene of Mickey Mouse and Bugs Bunny sharing the same screen time when they're jumping off a plane.
Ah, no!
Aw, poor fella.
Yeah, ain't I a stinker?
See, that's a great moment in itself. I should probably get a picture of that someday. However, they wanted to get every cartoon character. Okay? The producers were not able to acquire the rights to characters like Popeye, Tom and Jerry, Lil Lulu, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Superman, and Teddy Toons characters like Mighty Mouse and Jekyll and Jekyll, as just some examples. By the way, on a side note, this also marks as one of the last productions that Mel Blanc did most of the Looney Tunes roles that he did, coming back as he would do many of the Looney Tunes characters. The notable exception is Yosemite Sam, who was given out to New Jack comedian Joe Lasky. Yosemite Sam's voice was too taxing for Mel's old age at the time. And this also not be one of the last performances Mel Blanc would do before his death. Although he did have one appearance later on as Looney Tunes in the compilation film Daffy Duck's Quackbusters.
Oh, and one more thing. Anyone that works with me should never get me riled. Oh, and why not? Because I'm a split personality. That's why not.
I don't know about you, but this is about an ain't-smoking PSA to tell me that I should never smoke. Mae Ketzel also came back to do the voice of Betty Boop, being the last time she provided her voice ever. She also came.
But I still got it, Eddie. Boop boop be doo.
Yeah, you still got it.
She did a voice from in 1939. As for filming the movie, though, that also was added. Williams admitted that he was openly completely disdainful of Disney's bureaucracy and refused to work in Los Angeles. So, in a sense, they moved into his studio in London to help. They also helped ask if they could do distributing of his film in Coppola. However, that did not go well. This vision was used on most of the technology to produce the live-action scenes, comparing them with the animation scenes. Robot mannequins were placed to help out on the film to use amazing scenes. The actors were all given mime training too to make everything feel more natural and more easy to tell when the scene was going right. Bob Hoskins easily proved to be the best at this. However, some flaws were being made. The two hard scenes were known to be the Ink and Paint Club and the scene where Roger and Jim Eddie on Bane Cab. Speaking of which, make sure the lines were. Charles Fleischer was off camera giving his lines to Eddie Ballant. He even also asked for production suit to make a specialized suit of Roger Rabbit. And yes, he even got a bunny ears involved too.
Well, I've just approached this like I would approach any role. I don't consider this to be a voiceover. If anything, it had to be categorized. It's off-camera acting. I'm just there doing it. I prepare in the same way I would prepare for any role. I learn my lines. Just a minute, please. I'm doing an interview.
As for the animation sequences, post the animation was one of the hardest decisions to do, as Richard Williams is starting to be a bit hard to work with. As Richard Williams himself was going to be his own worst enemy when it came to acting. In a sense, Richard Williams even wanted to use the film in ones and not twos. If you guys know what I mean, he wanted the film to have 24 frames per second. However, because this was seen to be really hard, twos were employed instead on most of the production, making it okay. Now, most of the cast being stuff, the main post-production scenes were added in late stuff with effects being there. Effects and stuff. Most of the film was used by Best Division instead, and was using CGI by Industrial Light and Magic. For the music of the film, Robert Zemeckis' collaborator Alan Silvestri did compose a score with London Symphony Orchestra, given it a 1930s jazz idea volume. In volume on it, to see how whole production would hold up in the end, with how the jazz and boom extra afterwards. Because of the whole manner of it being made, initially it was hard to find a way to actually how to distribute the film. Initially, Disney thought of changing production to be more based off of ties of initially with themselves. However, due to Walt Disney due to the film being more adult oriented and some of the themes being skewed to what the film wanted, they changed it to be under the Touchstone Pictures banner instead, the Walt Disney Pictures banner. The film was released on June 22nd, 1988. And how'd it go? Well, it was nothing short of a success. On its opening weekend alone, it collected $11.4 million, $22 million on budget, and eventually grossed $154 million in the United States and Canada. And $197.4 million international, giving it a worldwide total of $351 million. It was making the second highest grossing film in 1988, but the 20th highest film in 1988. From 1988, only behind Rain Man. As for critics, well, it was nothing short of a success too.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit is one of those home runs that Hollywood hits every once in a while. It's a movie like 2001 or Close Encounters or especially like E.T. that's a technical breakthrough and a lot of fun both at the same time. This movie is great entertainment from one end to the other, but it's also one of those films where you're always asking yourself, how did they do that?
On Rotten Tomatoes, the film sits at 96%, with the consensus saying this: Who Framed Roger Rabbit is an innovative and entertaining film with groundbreaking mix of live action and animation with a touching original story to boot. Siskel and Roger Ebert wrote this in the Chicago Sun-Times. Sheer enchantment and entertainment from first to last. A joyous, giddy celebration of the kind of fun you have with a movie camera. Gene Siskel also gave sometimes praised the film by saying, his film is dappling. Well, also gave it 3 out of 4 stars. As for my review personally, well, honestly, this film is great. It perfectly encapsulates the mystery aspect too. With the bitter drunk of Eddie Valiant and being played masterfully by Bob Hoskins. Hoskins can very believably play a gruff detective with a role. Well, also, I just noticed this now, but this is also the second time in a row I mentioned a film with Bob Hoskins on it. If I had a nickel every time I mentioned Bob Hoskins film so far in this season, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's we'd have it twice, right? Anyways, Judge Doom is an effective villain, and the build that he's a tune more and more adds to the twist.
Holy smoke, he's a toon!
Surprised?
Not really. That lame brain freeway idea could only be cooked up by a toon.
Not just any tune!
Honestly, and the 2 segments between Roger, Jessica, and Eddie, and more are hilarious. They bring the humor in this film and make all it go amazingly in the film. That's honestly the charm with Who Framed Roger Rabbit. It perfectly calculates what makes the cartoon industry what it is to this day, making classic cartoons feel anything classically at the end. As for it will later get a Best Film Editing and Best Visual Effects Editing, Best Visual Effects Editing, and Special Achievement Award at the Oscars for its will. However, like always, Roger Rabbit would get into some controversies. On its initial laserdisc, fans discovered that Jessica Rabbit was actually going commando in a few shots, mainly in the shot where he flies from being a cab, and afterwards it was animated out in many different areas. Okay, but for the longest time, people have been wondering if Roger was so great and had such a box of success, why was there never a sequel? Well, there were many attempts at making a sequel, but they all fell through. And our first sequel was called Roger Rabbit Toon Platoon, set during 1941 or 1943. It begins with Roger finding out he is actually a toon and not human, and instead decides to go into a Hollywood where he meets Jessica Rabbit. Then he enlists in cartoons in the movie instead, and then he enlists in the movie to have a whole idea in the army become Jessica Rabbit. In the end, he starts his career in Hollywood Boulevard, and we met his mother, and he also meets his father. Who is his father? Well, the one and only Bugs Bunny.
You know you stinker.
Yeah. This draft, however, wasn't okay. Spielberg left the project initially had on to direct the project. However, after directing Schindler's List, Spielberg didn't want to do a comedic adaptation of Nazis. In a sense, Spielberg left the project in 1980 afterwards. Another project was called Who Discovered Roger Rabbit? In this one, it would have been a 2D and 3D idea being a mix of live action and 2D. However, this version was also banned for being way too expensive, as the 3D budget alone would make the balloons budget balloon out of control. Another attempt we tried to make was back in was doing a charming adaptation of The Stooge, starring Mickey Mouse and Roger Rabbit. It takes place 5 years before Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and was about how Jessica met Roger. However, this version was also scrapped afterwards. As such, there's never been a full-on definitive sequel to Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The legacy of Roger Rabbit, though, cannot be forgotten. And as made you see, he would get 3 different shorts afterwards. Those being Trail Mix-Up, Roller Coaster Rabbit, and Tiny Trouble, as 3 different short films to get of Roger Rabbit. There's going to be a 4th short later on called Hair in My Soup. However, this one was scrapped after Disney and Amblin both split up in the 1990s. Roger Rabbit to this day is known to be one of the best films out ever, receiving praise and high acclaim for all its achievements. In 2016, the film was selected for preservation in the National Film Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. Nowadays, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is celebrated by the masses for its clever humor, great political satire, and cartoons, and for its huge themes in the era. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. This almost 40-year-old film nowadays has been entertaining audiences for such a long time that it really feels like it's become a huge staple of the cartoon industry, regardless of what you think. And honestly, that's what makes Roger Rabbit great. Not only is it a great film to begin with its humorous spin on cartoons, characters, film noir, and more, but it also is just the perfect hybrid. It perfectly matches both the live action and animation elements together, having the idea down in a sense. And it turns out that not everyone, including J.K. Wolf, who later on in his second book, which I actually do own, but I don't have to explain it to you right now, who plugged Roger Rabbit. He rewrote this. This whole book right here, Who Said Roger Rabbit, was nothing more than a bad dream concocted by Jessica Rabbit. He also later on wrote a 3rd novel called Who Whacked Roger Rabbit. These are, I haven't read either book yet. I'm honestly still going through a few other books right now, but still, it definitely has a bit of a big helping sense. And of course, it helps out that Framed Roger Rabbit has given us a big clarification to see how these films go on throughout the whole medium of cartoons and animation. Before we end off, I'd like to give a bit of a thank you to some VTubers, okay? Mainly Yesterworld Entertainment, who made a video that goes way more into detail than I did here. I'll try to keep the video as brief and as short as possible to keep you guys entertained on the video. Thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you want to listen to podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can also listen to a Spotify, Amazon, Apple, or wherever you listen to this podcast. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, where we get podcasts uploaded to you on daily. And please follow me on Bluesky. This guy comes up. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you all later.
I like the sound of that. That's all, folks.